Well, good evening and welcome to the third of our Thursday evening online Bible classes on Lessons on the Mountain. We're spending the bulk of our time in the Gospel of Matthew, particularly in chapters 5, 6 and 7. And I'm delighted that these classes are continuing and hopefully finding some useful place in our lives. And I sincerely hope that they're helping all of us grow closer to God as we seek to follow in the steps of Jesus. So this evening we're going to be looking at what are generally known as the Beatitudes. And, maybe we should start by saying that the word beatitude is a transliteration of the Latin beatus, which essentially means blessed or blessed, though also has the idea of being happy or blissful or fortunate or flourishing. It's the word used here in the Vulgate translation of Matthew. Now, the word used here in Matthew 5 is the Greek word Macarios. So sometimes these Beatitudes are known as Macarisms, but you can call them just whatever you choose. Traditionally, the word has been translated as blessed or blessed, although a number of modern translators have preferred the word happy. I think really it's a rather poor exchange, but consider just for a moment the Good News translation has happy are those, the Common English Bible, happy are people who are, J.B. Phillips has how happy are the, and on he goes. The Contemporary English version has a slightly different rendering with God blesses those people who are poor of spirit, who are meek, who are however it goes. So it is true, of course, that those who are blessed will generally be profoundly happy, as long as we understand the meaning of the word happy. But being blessed cannot be reduced to simply being happy, particularly as that word is really understood in a number of different ways. The problem is that there really is no good single word in the English language that communicates the complexity, beauty, and nuance of this word. The transliteration blessed certainly sits well with our English translation. Our English translations of the Hebrew scriptures, perhaps most notably in the Psalms. Here, the word blessed or blessed is used frequently in our English translations throughout the Psalms, though itself is not necessarily the best way to render the Hebrew terms from which it is translated. The idea of being blessed suggests that we have become the recipients of some active divine favour. And this, of course, is true, but it's not necessarily the intention of these opening statements of Jesus. The word happy suggests more of a way of being within the world, and though it begins to address the issue, the idea of happiness is often reduced to little more than a momentary good feeling, and this is why some now prefer the term flourishing, as it seems to convey something far deeper and more permanent in the life of one who is walking with God day by day. It's the word that we've used in our reading that you will find alongside these lessons there on our YouTube channel. The word seems to be associated with the idea of wholeness, and that's another theme which we will see to be significant here in this teaching on the mountain. But for now, I'm going to keep with the standard text of the ESV, but with an understanding that Jesus is not simply speaking of the act of being blessed by God, but also of the state of well-being in harmony with the whole purpose of God, remembering that Jesus came to give us life, to give us life to the very full. And as we read through these opening declarations, it'll become immediately clear that these are not the ways of the world. And the more that we get to know Jesus and his teachings, the more we will understand how that they came to turn the world in which we reside upside down, or as some have said, back the right way again. Well, here they are, the Beatitudes, the Macarisms of Jesus here in this teaching on the mountain. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Well, let's take a look at these one at a time, although we're not going to get quite to the end of the list in this session, but anything we don't cover we'll certainly pick up in the next. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Well, the first thing that I would like us to notice is that both this and the last of the main list end in the same fashion, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And this may indicate that all else between can be included within this theme. That is, that everything here has to do with the kingdom of heaven. Carson, in his book on this section of scripture, speaks of the Beatitudes as the norms of the kingdom. But who, we must ask, who are the poor in spirit? Well, the clarification in spirit suggests that Jesus is not speaking of financial or material poverty, although the clarification is missing in the parallel teaching found in Luke chapter 6, which reads, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God." Now, it's true that the people of God were often poor, and often as a result of their disobedience and subsequent oppression, and so we find them being referred to simply as the poor in various places. We find them calling upon the Lord in this condition of poverty, which, though may often appear to be mere material poverty, is very often indicating an underlying sense of spiritual poverty. Some of the words used for poor can also mean lowly or humble, and so these two ideas seem often to be associated with the other. For example, in Proverbs chapter 16, we read that it is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. So here that idea of lowly spirit and poverty being contrasted against the proud there. So here in this teaching on the mountain, the idea seems to be an acknowledgement of spiritual poverty, even spiritual bankruptcy, if you like, and of our complete dependence upon God. So to walk with God and to truly flourish in life as God intends, we must first recognize our personal spiritual poverty, our complete dependency upon Him. And if we cannot say in all sincerity that without God we are nothing, we could be nothing, and we could do nothing, then the kingdom of heaven cannot be ours. And so we move on. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. This is not referring to the act of mourning for those who have died, at least not in the physical sense. Of course, those who do mourn for the departed will be comforted, but that's surely not the principal meaning here. Rather than focus upon our response to specific incidents or circumstances of life, Jesus is setting out in these concise statements the secrets of the life that flourishes regardless of incident or circumstance. For true happiness or true blessedness, true flourishing, transcends all of life's activities. It's dependent upon our disposition and our true inner well-being. And in a world that's becoming increasingly aware of mental health issues, the significance of Jesus' teaching here can really hardly be overemphasized. The world has likely always been obsessed with pursuit of meaning in life, at least when it's not preoccupied with matters of survival and basic sustenance. This has never been far from people's thoughts. We've said a little bit of this previously, but this pursuit of meaning in life has taken all sorts of forms. But for many throughout the ages, this search for meaning becomes a pursuit of pleasure. As Paul would write to those in Corinth, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Of course, that's not what he believed. The idea of you only live once, so make the most of it, get the most out of life as soon as you can, are the sort of things that we might hear around us. But of course it's never enough. Inevitably, it always leaves us disappointed. Still, the world in which we live seems to be characterized increasingly by laughter and frivolity, and this is the way of the world. Life is all about having fun, going out, holidaying, partying, and on and on and on. Now, that's certainly not to say that the way of Jesus, the way of the kingdom of heaven, is one of perpetual sadness, weeping, and misery. No, but I'm sure a healthy dose of these things is really most beneficial. No. The way of the kingdom of heaven is one of blessedness. It's one of happiness, if you like. It's a way of flourishing and living life to the very full. But we will not find joy and laughter in anything that is harmful or detrimental to others, or in any way that is opposed to a holy God. We may find momentary pleasure, of course. We may find a passing sense of joy, but ultimately, the ways of this world will always lead to enslavement and misery, and we know this to be true, for we ourselves have mourned. We've mourned for our own shortcomings and our own inconsistencies, and maybe we have at times been almost overcome with grief. And this is it's a personal grief over personal sin. This is the recognition of our wretchedness, as Paul would write to those in Rome, "Wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death?" And when James speaks of disciples of Jesus walking with God, he'll say, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. For at the end of the day, that is certainly what God wishes to do with us, to exalt us, but that is only possible in any eternal concept of these things if we first recognize our spiritual poverty and mourn for the wrong that we have done, for our selfishness, for our self-centeredness, and on and on and on. And maybe not only do we mourn for our own shortcomings, but maybe we mourn for the sin of the nation, for the sin of the world. I really wish we had more time to deal with this further. Those who walked with me a while ago through the book of the prophet Ezekiel may remember the episode where he was taken by the Spirit of God on a guided tour of the city of Jerusalem. If you remember that, you find that in Ezekiel chapters 8, 9, 10 and 11. And he encounters here within this visionary experience a man clothed in linen. And the Lord said to him, "Pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it." And so here's a picture of those who are mourning, sighing and groaning over the sin of their city, the sin of the world in which they live. And of course the sad matter of all of that is that this chap clothed in linen did not need to use a great deal of ink, for there were not many foreheads of those who sighed and groaned. They were few and far between. Well, here, back to our passage here in this teaching on the mountain. Jesus had said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." The parallel passage, if you like, in Luke 6, understanding that that this is teaching that Jesus must have given on numerous occasions, in numerous locations. Here Luke records, "Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh." And he'll then record Jesus saying, "Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep." Yet again, the ideas, the ways of this world being turned upon their head. And we need to understand here, of course, that to mourn is not to forego happiness. Quite the opposite. To mourn is to find true happiness and true flourishing in life lived in the presence of God. And remember this. Jesus said, "Blessed," or flourishing, "are those who mourn, not those who condemn." That is not our place. That is not our position. But it is for us to mourn. And he continues, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Do we need to say that meekness is not weakness? I didn't think so, but we've said it anyway. Look, where poverty of spirit speaks of our awareness of our desperate need for God, where mourning speaks of our deep sorrow for what we have made of our lives, both individually and collectively as humanity, meekness or gentleness speaks of how we relate to others, including God. Meekness has our selfish desires and ambitions under control and instead puts others before ourselves. And in this way, the meek would rather defend others than defend themselves. Well, what does that have to say to a world of fault-finding and litigation, huh? I mean, what does this have to say to those always fighting for their rights and wanting to cancel all those of opposing views, huh? You know, the way of the world is certainly not a way of meekness. But it must be just that for the disciple of Jesus. Meekness it's not the way of the world in which we live, a world that puts self first and takes whatever it can. Rather, meekness knows who we are in relation to the God who created all things. To be meek is to live within the worldview where God is sovereign of all creation, and it is in this that we will inherit the earth. And in this picture that is essentially borrowed from Psalm 37, we find the principle that the wicked will always be driven from the land, but those who know their place, they shall inherit it. You might want to take a read of Psalm 37 sometime. And what a splendid antidote to the philosophical and sociological materialism that is so prevalent in the world around us. A world that is longing to hold on to everything for self will ultimately, at the end of the day, will always lose it all. Well, Jesus continues to say, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." You know, this righteousness is certainly not a self-righteousness, nor is it that righteousness given to us by Christ through faith. This righteousness is a recognition of a conformity to and a demonstration of the will of God. And so righteousness becomes a prevalent theme and encompassing theme throughout this teaching on the mountain. It's mentioned twice in this list of Beatitudes, once here, later in connection with persecution, and then it's mentioned in what is essentially a key text following shortly after these opening declarations. We'll have more to say of this next week as we consider that righteousness which exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, of the religious people of the days of Jesus. But here in this hungering and thirsting for righteousness, here is an almost obsessive desire for doing that which is right, not in the sight of the world, but that which is right in the sight of God. We'll say more of the nature of this righteousness later. Of course, Jesus has a great deal more to say about it. But what of its attraction? Why should we long for it so much that we could be said to be hungering and thirsting for it? Well, take a look at what is the first psalm in the book of Psalms, and this here paints a picture of this same sort of hungering and thirsting that the people of God have always to have had for the law of the Lord, for all that is right and good and proper in the sight of God. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He's like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. And that's how the book of Psalms begins. To hunger and thirst is a very powerful concept. It's quite different from simply having an inclination for. Blessed are those who rather like righteousness, or blessed are those who fancy a bit of righteousness. Just doesn't do it. To hunger and thirst is to so strongly desire that little will ever get in our way. It's not simply to enjoy going to church, whatever that may mean. It's not to occasionally enjoy reading the Bible. It is to deeply long for the things of God. If our lives are not flourishing, maybe we are not truly hungering and thirsting for righteousness. For they shall be satisfied. They shall be filled. They shall not want. Oh, of course, another psalm comes to mind. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. And what a beautiful, beautiful psalm that is. You may remember the time when Jesus spoke to a woman by a well in Samaria. He says to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Let us thirst for the water of Christ. And later Jesus would say to them, the crowd whom he had fed with just a few loaves and fish, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. For Jesus always satisfies our deepest hungerings and thirstings. And this doesn't mean that we shall cease hungering and thirsting. On the contrary, we will only want more and more and more. We'll never be able to get enough. Or as Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, woe to you who are full now, for you shall be hungry. Well, here in this teaching on the mountain, Jesus continues by saying, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. I think we need to be careful not to understand this as being some sort of contractual condition for receiving mercy. That is not the purpose of these teachings. Jesus is not saying that if you wish to receive mercy, then you need to demonstrate mercy to others, however true that might be. Rather, he is saying that only those whose lives are characterized by mercy will ever be able to flourish in life and so live life to the full, receiving mercy every step of the way. For the kingdom of heaven is itself characterized by mercy. It is where we find mercy. It is where mercy always prevails over judgment. And you might want to see what James has to say of that in his letter later in the New Testament. But later in this teaching here on the mountain, Jesus will have more to say about judgment, about passing judgment on others. But here he emphasizes the blessedness, the happiness, the true deep-seated flourishing happiness that comes from being full of mercy. I suppose there's a reluctance, is there not, on the part of many people to show mercy. I mean, maybe some see it as a sign of weakness. Maybe some see that to demonstrate mercy is to let go of the hold that one may have over another, and so to perhaps make oneself vulnerable. But Jesus assures us that to be merciful is the only real way to live, knowing that we too will be shown mercy. No motive is given here for being merciful, but the one who knows that his spiritual poverty, the one who weeps over her shortcomings and inconsistencies, the one who recognizes the greater importance of others and who longs to do only what is right in the sight of God, knowing his or her complete dependence upon God for all things. Well, can he or she be anything other than merciful? Can the one who depends upon the mercy of God ever be unmerciful to others? Sometime later, Jesus was to tell a dramatic story of an unmerciful servant who, even though he had been forgiven a huge debt, refused to forgive a fellow servant who owed him a relatively small amount. You can find that story in Matthew chapter 18. Well, on another occasion, Jesus told a short story involving the Pharisees, whom Jesus will mention very shortly in this teaching. Luke tells us that then Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness and scorned everyone else. two men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a despised tax collector. Well, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. "Oh, I thank you, God, that I'm not like other people, cheaters and sinners, adulterers. I'm certainly not like that tax collector. Oh, I fast twice a week and I give you 1/10 of my income." But the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner." I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall indeed receive mercy. Well, blessed are the pure in heart. Jesus continues, for they shall see God. Jesus has much to say about our hearts, making it clear that the state of our hearts will profoundly affect the lives that we live. We'll say more about Jewish understanding of this word in a later session. But for now, the following may be useful. Jesus will later say, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander." These are things that come out of the heart. David recognized this same idea in Psalm 24. Where he writes, "Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob." Aye, those who have clean hands and a pure heart. Well, purity of heart is not the same as an outward conformity to rules. It's one thing to appear to live a good and decent life, but it's altogether something different to have a heart that is pure. So what do we think about when there's little to do, when our minds become disengaged and wander? What do we think about? With what do we occupy our minds when we think of our deepest longings and desires? To what extent are our words and deeds a true reflection of what lives within us? Could we ever be found to be guilty of hypocrisy? Doing or saying something at odds with our inner being? Difficult, yeah? I wonder whether John was thinking of this teaching as he wrote many years later in what we have as his first letter. "Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. And everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure." And what a joy when one day we shall indeed see him. But now, do we see him even now? Then blessed are the peacemakers. For they shall be called the sons of God. It's not enough to be peaceful, nor simply to long for peace. The flourishing life belongs to those who are makers of peace. Of course, there's no greater peacemaker than Jesus himself. Following his resurrection, you may recall, as they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace to you." Later, Paul will write to those in Ephesus, "For he himself is our peace," speaking of Jesus, the one who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. And many, many, many years earlier, when speaking of the coming Messiah, the prophet Isaiah says, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, 'Your God reigns.'" The good news of Jesus is categorically, without a single shadow of doubt, the greatest peacemaking message the world has ever seen. And as followers of Jesus, we simply cannot be anything other than peacemakers. But Jesus has in mind here more than simply proclaiming a message of peace. As those who have been reconciled to God in Christ, we are to be by nature a people of reconciliation. I know there are those who seem to go through life wreaking havoc wherever they go, leaving behind them a trail of devastation. But the one who would follow Jesus must be quite the opposite to this. True blessedness, real happiness, a flourishing life belongs to those characterized by peace. And wherever they go, they shall leave a trail of peace behind them. So what a serious indictment of those who profess to follow Jesus and yet who create division and discord and disunity among the people of God. They're not of Christ, and their lives are certainly not flourishing. No, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God or children of God. Here's the idea: like father, like son. Making peace is simply the family business. And as far as it is possible, we are to live at peace with all. Well, the two remaining opening declarations or Beatitudes or Macarisms address the matter of persecution. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Well, we'll return to these in our next session before moving on to discuss matters of salt and light. But for now, may God bless each one of us in abundance as we seek to live lives that are flourishing in the presence of God. May God bless us that we might be a blessing to those around us. Thank you.